Hello, Monte. Nice to have you. All right. Today we're covering the Gilded Age with the Latino people. All right. And so as I'm going on to this, are there any questions you have? Right. Let's see here. All right. Well, if you change your mind, just unmute yourself. All right. And feel free to do so. So I'm going to share the page. All right. Remember with the Gilded Age, it was named that because I guess something that's gilded is superficially done in metallurgy. It's something that looks nice and shiny and impressive on the outside with a facade, but you scratch the surface and it might be very corrupt. It's a very superficial job. And that's what we're talking about here. Mark Twain named it that, and it was kind of an apt term to a lot of people. Because on the outside, right, the gross national product, like the number of goods that were being produced throughout the country and sold, just skyrocketed. Um, Overall, per capita income went up. There suddenly became a plethora of consumer goods to be able to buy by mail order, by strip malls, and um, and storefronts in the cities, especially. Um, let's see here. You have the availability of lots of new products that can make life more efficient as far as your job and just easier as far as your standard of living. All right, and so with luxury goods, etc. So you have that going on, and that all seems to be great. You have new types of entertainment going on, like with professional sports, and you have the notion finally of the weekend to enjoy the weekend and go somewhere to like a Nickelodeon, like an early theater, a stadium, a boxing ring, etc. You have lots of inventions at this time because corporations are going to be able to draw from stock subscribers who are buying stock in their company from all over the world. And so that gives them lots of capital to play with. And so they hire research and development teams, like people like Nikola Tesla, and they invent things around the clock. And so, like in one given year, there were 1,093 patents in the famous New Jersey, um, uh, kind of a science room under General Electric with Tesla working there. So at any rate, candy, just all kinds of like just different luxuries become mass produced and available at this time. And so, like I said, the standard of living supposedly went up overall per capita. But then there was a downside to it, right? There developed a burgeoning or growing gap between the rich and the poor. Howard Zinn states that the top 1% of the population, tiny 1% of the population, owned over 50% of the property, of the wealth and assets in property. And so that was pretty inequitable. That's pretty unfair. Then also with the employers with their workers, there weren't a lot of promising prospects to rise up the chain at the workplace. Oftentimes, they kept their wages low. They were very stingy in who they would allow to become foremen or supervisors and work their way up to an almost white collar, middle class position. And so that was difficult to do. And then also, some people contend that the average job only paid like $453, and you needed $600 a year just to survive. So, hence, families needed multiple breadwinners working in factories just to be able to make ends meet. So, when you're struggling like that, the idea is you're not going to have many opportunities to, go to night school, uh, uh, just join the middle class in one way or another. Then also the workers, when they tried to organize and fight back, they had very little success. You had the beginnings of some big unions at this time, the American Federation of Labor, the Knights of Labor, but they just they were squashed by and large. They had some success in the 1877 railroad strike, the Great Railroad Strike. They got some concessions from that, and it was huge. Then in 1892, the workers at the Homestead plant for Carnegie tried to strike, and they ended up getting in a battle and forcefully removed from the premises because they did a sit-in at the property, and that got ugly, and they did not get what they wanted. They lost their jobs. And then you had the Pullman strike, a guy who was to be given a second or third consecutive what's the word I'm thinking of? Your shift. And he said no. They said, well, if you walk off, that your job is done. And he walked down the line of the railroad telling people what had happened. And they'd already been organizing. There was a guy named Eugene Debs who identified as a socialist. And he kind of took control of things. And it turned into the Great Pullman Strike that involved over 20 states and territories. They stopped the railroads throughout many of those states, and they seemed to make a lot of noise. But in the end, the federal military intervened and squashed the strike and squashed the rebellion because they were destroying property. They were blowing up railroad cars, attacking Pinkertons, privately paid police, etc. It was pretty nasty. So at any rate, right, you're having kind of class warfare. We became number one or number two in accidents at the workplace. That's not good. And then when it comes to the petty bourgeoisie, like the small mom and pop shops, they got gobbled up. They got gobbled up by the big guys. The big guys would come in like Rockefeller, and he'd contend, right? I see that you made about 300,000 last year. That's great. Well, I made so many million. How about I take this headache off you and run this oil plant for you, and I'll give you 8% share. And with 8% share, you'll be making at least 300,000, doing nothing at all, enjoying your grandkids and enjoying an early retirement. Sometimes they would take that offer for a merger, and sometimes they wouldn't. And when they didn't, that's when things got ugly. And what he would do, right, is he wanted to control every facet of his production. And he ended up pretty much doing so. And that included especially transportation and storage. And so in those storage and transportation companies, he would buy a majority share of the stock. And when you did so, in most of the open public corporations, you automatically received a position on their governing board. And he would tell these people, I'm not going to store your oil. I'm not going to ship your oil. I'm going to make sure that it doesn't happen if you don't merge with me. And so they had a way of bullying other people. And so they ended up taking over entire industries. Rockefeller with oil, Carnegie with steel, Cyrus McCormick with farm equipment, James Duke with tobacco, etc. And so, and what helped, right, is they had total control, vertical integration as well, for every step. So Rockefeller, he excavated the oil with his own oil derricks. He had his own barrels. He had a majority share in both railroads and both shipping companies to ship his stuff to the refinery. He had the refinery. They, in the process of refining the oil, it made a mess, and he turned that mess into like over 30 different other products, most of them household products that he sold on the side. And then he had them sold at the markets. So he controlled every step of the process, and that helped him dominate his industry. So at any rate, you have a lot of what they call casualties of progress. It's the historians are very quick to implement conflict history when they do the Gilded Age. Conflict history, remember, is competition for power, competition for wealth, resources, etc. And those who lost, the conflict historians try to elicit your compassion and your indignation for them. And so that carries over to the Latino assignment. All right. On the Latino assignment, I say that when you look at the data, even a cursory look at the historical data of Latinos during the Gilded Age ought to convince historians to create a narrative in conflict history fashion. All right. So they had the three C's in Arizona, and cattle, copper, and cotton. And at first, Latino business owners were a part of those three. But as I mentioned, with mergers and also economies of scale, with economies of scale, right, you take advantage of having much, much more of the product. And you kind of pull a Walmart on them, and you just put a lower price than they could afford to go and run them out of business. And so before long, it didn't take long, and Arizona was run by kind of Anglo-American corporations. And the copper mining company, the Anaconda Copper Mining Company, liked to employ Mexican laborers, and but they did not pay them well. And when they organized and they struck, it did not end well for them. So it's kind of the same old thing. And then in New Mexico, you had the same domination of big business with the addition of corruption. See here, they rigged elections, they chose provisional governors and judges who were in their pockets, and they manipulated the law in New Mexico in their favor. It became so infamous that the president, Rutherford B. Hayes, put in a provisional governor to clean things up there in New Mexico. But the author that I was reading contended that it was too little too late. All right. And so you also had the political machines, and the political machines did the same thing with Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans that they did with the new immigrants, as they called them in the East Coast. They generically called them new because they were not WASP. They were not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. They were not from Western Europe. They came from the Near East. They came from the Baltic and the Balkans area. They came from Russia and Ukraine. They came from Sicily and southern Italy, etc. And so they were quite different in their culture, and they were kind of stuck, right, in the proletariat with jobs that did not pay well, that were dangerous, and that were struck down if they tried to strike and organize. So the same thing with the Mexican Americans, right? And then to add insult to injury, look at the People versus Elia. It said that Latinos could not even give testimony in court on account of their Native American blood. That's going to change. They're going to simply make the census terms as white or colored, and Hispanics they'll be termed Hispanics, and that namely just refers to Spain, and be treated legally as white people as far as giving testimony in court. But they're still going to be discriminated against. Okay. They were kept from certain white collar jobs. They were kept from loans. They were kept from being able to buy a home in certain areas. We'll get in further detail on that soon. Okay. So, and then look at this. When the big corporations came in on the smaller competitors, the white Anglo smaller competitors refused to collaborate with their Latino counterparts because of racism. So that could have helped them. And instead, they wouldn't even help themselves in aligning themselves with the Latinos. So you see here different industries that develop: lumber milling, boot making, textile, which is clothing production, mining, vegetable and fruit canneries, breweries, wineries, distilleries, lock and clock factories, and machine tool production constituted just a few of the industries that came of age to show some diversification during the Gilded Age, where we're making, a lot of products in a lot of different industries, which for the entire country was good, for the entire economy But again, you always are going to have casualties of progress. And Latinos were a part of that demographic of losers in this industrial revolution. It's technically known as the second industrial revolution in the 1870s to 1900, but it's the main one. All right. So beneath this surface, however, was plutocratic domination. Remember, plutocracy is the government is in with big business. At this stage of economic development, cities seemed to live and breathe off the railroads and water. However, only cities like San Francisco and LA had the money to bribe railroads to run through their territory, and corporations quickly monopolized water sources and shared disproportionately with wealthy cities, to the loss of isolated farmers in small towns. Thus, those desperate for wages flocked to the growing cities. Such cities, claims Rice, quickly became segregated in housing and stratified, rich versus poor, separated. If it weren't unfortunate enough that working class people were forced to live in slum districts with little opportunity for upward mobility, prejudice against Mexicans, Chinese, African Americans, and new immigrants rendered them in the absolute least desirable urban neighborhoods. And that's not the worst of it. Barred from business and employment opportunities, states Rice, excluded from or segregated in schools, churches, and other majority-dominated institutions, and politically neutralized by gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, right, is when they'd find a certain area of a city that constituted a majority of Latinos, and they didn't want them to elect anybody into office by forming a majority. So they would split that enclave of Latinos living together up into 3, 4, or even more groups. And they would join each little segment of that enclave with a majority of Anglo settlers, so that they would constitute deliberately the numerical minority in all the voting districts. And then in addition to that, they had literacy tests to be able to vote. They had poll taxes to be able to vote. And a lot of Latinos could not afford it. And some of them did not have a good enough command of English to pass the literacy tests. And sometimes they had double standards with the literacy tests, making them in certain districts and areas of Anglos extremely easy and making them extremely difficult for the Latinos. Okay. And then it ends with the story of the great orphan abduction, whereby Irish Catholic nuns tried to give orphans from New York to Latinos in New Mexico or Arizona. And the Anglo public got up in arms about it and said they did not want them raising white Irish kids. And they forced violence in stopping it from happening. All right. And so, yeah, you have the natural economic forces that are going. And some people blame this, right, on a lack of sufficient government regulation. We didn't have antitrust laws worth a darn. We had a Sherman Act, but it was very vague and it was never enforced against trusts, the big guys ganging up with each other against the smaller guys. You had an Interstate Commerce Act that stated that all railroads and storage facilities had to charge the same rate for everybody, and that rate had to be reasonable and just, but it wasn't enforced. So it did no good. All right. And in these mergers that kept happening, no one was stopping it, whereby they were forcing people, they were blackmailing people into merging into their bigger companies. So as if all that economic reality was not ugly enough, then you add to it racism and racial discrimination and not wanting to give loans and house contracts to Latinos and not advancing them at the workplace and not letting them get a wage increase, not allowing them to strike. And it just got even uglier. All right. So Monte, do you have any questions? Okay, good, good. All right, Monte, that's it. It was kind of a short one, but that's it for this coming week. It's Latinos in the Gilded Age, and like I said, I just subscribe it to Conflict History that they sadly lost, and they lost for the aforementioned reasons that I just gave. And it does. It rightfully makes you feel a sense of compassion and empathy, as well as even some indignation, some kind of like righteous anger for the unfairness of this situation. Okay. Now, in fairness, I will say one thing to show a little bit of complexity is the Santa Fe ring that was so corrupt and enriched itself at the expense of other businesses and other people. The Santa Fe ring was comprised of some old wealthy Latinos. So you could imagine, right, in the Chicano books, they're going to call them bandidos, sellouts to their people, and joining up with these Anglo bankers, lawyers, corporations, etc., to enrich themselves at the expense of most of their fellow Latino people. All right. But that's it, Monte. I hope that's okay. I know it was very short, but that's just that's the gist of what you have for this week. I hope that's okay. So you doing okay? All right, thank you, Monte. I appreciate the thumbs up. All right. You'll get your extra credit for this, okay? So you take care, and I hope to see you next week. All right. Take care, Monte.